Okay, good morning, everyone. Thinking of having a quick start today. Um, I hope you all are okay. Yeah, um, okay. I've shared my screen. I hope it's visible to you all, and I hope I sound clear to you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah. So the uh, previous sessions of ours were where we talked about what an infectious disease is, and we talked about little bit about how they spread, the modes of spread, and then we talked about our defenses, and we talked about defenses that we acquire through artificial immunity. This is through vaccinations. We'll talk more in detail about this and how they work. And we also talked about um, the last weekend that we talked, we majorly we focused on the different vectors. So how are diseases transmitted? How do they spread? What types of vectors do we have? And how do we know how lethal they are? How do we um, um, get to combat these infectious agents? So today we'll talk about our understanding on of about how the body provides the first line of defense. So as I said to you, that we have different lines of defense in our body. So there's a first line defense against infectious transmissions, and what are the benefits of vaccination? So this is the second line of defense. So the first is within our own body. So any questions, please let me know. So we talked about a bit about how infections spread, but this is a more detailed overview of it. So there's six basically key stages. They're known as the chain of infection. So as you know, there's a chain. If there's a chain, and if you break that chain in between, that then reduces the chances of the disease to be transmitted. I hope you get me. So if there's a break in any of these six stages, so there will be no more transmission. There are very less chances of being transmitted unless there's another chain that links so the ultimate aim of these pathogens, or the ultimate the outcome of the whole chain of infection, is that the pathogen enters the body of a human being. For example, it can enter the body of an animal also, but here we are talking about a human being. So the first is that the harmful pathogen causes the infection. Let's talk about COVID-19. Okay, or let's talk about a bacteria, Salmonella, let's say, which causes stomach infection. So it's a harmful pathogen. Pathogen is an organism that causes pathogenesis. What is pathogenesis? It is disease. It is okay. So any pathogenesis is the process of disease formation. So, for instance, if it's diabetes, there's a pathogenesis for that. There's a chain of not infection. There's a chain of uh, changes that happen in the body. So unless those things happen, diabetes would not result. So probably that chain of disease is through genetics, or probably it's through the environment. So like we have a chain of infection, we have chain of disease formation in non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension. So all these chronic diseases also require some sort of, not an infectious agent, but some sort of trigger. Without that trigger, they can't just develop on their own. So very less chances. So some are idiopathic. So idiopathic is that we don't know the cause, but most of them are known. So there's a harmful pathogen, again, a bacterial infection that causes an infection. So that infectious agent is there. The environment allows the pathogen to multiply. So there's some organisms that can exist outside the human being, but there are certain organisms that have to have a human being or a body to multiply. So that environment becomes favorable. So if you see if there's a fungal growth, if there's a fungal growth in a toenail, for instance, um, what environment would you want for that fungal growth? So you would want an unhygienic environment. Okay, so that fungus is there everywhere. But how do you make the environment more conducive for that pathogen to multiply? So if it doesn't multiply, it won't create the problems that it has to create inside the body. So that fungus finds the toenail that is moist, that is unhygienic, and that is warm. So it will wet and warm. So it can be, it has to have a wet environment. Okay, so fungus grows in wet, but then there are other organisms that grow in dry environment as well. So it depends upon what environment there is to for them to multiply. Then there is a transport that allows the pathogen to move. So that the organism has already multiplied, and then the transport helps it to move. So that transport can be through water, the transport can be through vectors such as flies, that transport could be through other vectors such as malaria. So, and then there's a route into the body that allows the pathogen to enter. So if your body does not allow that pathogen to enter their body, for instance, it's through immunity that is within that human being. So we have immunity, our skin is intact, so that is immune um, to allow infections to enter our body. But then when we lose our intact skin, for instance, if our immunity goes low because of several reasons, or we have a bruise on our skin, so that open bruise allows more infections to enter. That is why with an open bruise, you always want to give an antibiotic just to be on the safe side. Then there is a route in the body that allows the pathogen to exit. Now, once it's entered, it's developed there, and then after its development, it needs to exit to go to another person. So that's a chain. So from one person to another, the pathogen enters the body of another person. So let's imagine I was infected. I got this infection, and I had an unhygienic living condition that allowed the pathogen in my house to multiply. It was transported to move inside me. There was a route into my body that allowed the pathogen to enter. Let's say it was my lungs, my mouth, my and my immunity also reduced. That pathogen entered my body, did whatever havoc it had to do, and now it's exiting, and then it wants to enter into another person. Now this chain continues and continues and continues like it did in COVID-19. But for instance, if you block this path, or if you block this path, number 4, okay? So what if I was vaccinated? I won't allow the pathogen to enter my body. So if I won't allow it to enter my body, it's going to find another entry. But what if that other entry is also blocked through vaccination or through innate immunity or through distancing, let's say? This is why we recommended distances, so that we are breaking the chain of infection. Okay. So, what is the first line of defense in the body against infection? There are different types of cells. There are red blood cells, there are white blood cells, there are platelets, and their immune systems. We have numerous cells in our body, okay? So this is the first line of defense. What is the first line of defense? These are the immune systems of our body. So red blood cells, they have their own function. White blood cells, they have their own function. Platelets have their own function. We have the immune system within our bodies that are responsible for immunity. Okay, so they give natural cover or natural protection to our body. There are B cells called antibodies. There are T cells called killer cells. I'll share a video with you online tonight where I have seen that it was so amazing that they showed a killer T cell that entered a cancer cell, and they showed the way it was blasting on that cancer cell. So it invaded that cancer cell and it kept blasting whatever it does. It kills the cancer cell, and the cancer cell just shrunk. So these are amazing cells that we have, amazing warriors within our own body. I wish I had that. I'll share it with you. Maybe if not today, then tomorrow. So the vaccine is an artificial immunity. Okay, so it introduces an antigen into the body. What is an antigen? It's a disease-causing agent. Okay, so the antigen that is introduced will work with the B and the T cells to new neutral new or neutralize the infection. Okay, so this antigen, it's not the real organism that is causing the infection. It's a different form of the organism. So it's lab tested. So all vaccines are lab tested. They use the same organism, but they change it, they modify it so that it, instead of causing harm, it causes the B cells and the T cells to arise and to become activated and to neutralize the infection, to kill the infection. COVID-19 was a good example. Okay, we'll keep talking about COVID-19 because it's recent with us. We have innate immunity within ourselves. So that's our immune system that is there already. We don't need to activate it. Okay, so this is, we have our two systems. So the innate immunity, which we have the skin. As I said, if there's a cut in the skin, a bruise in the skin, sorry, a cut in the skin, there's a discontinuation in the continuous lining of the skin that will lead to invasion of other organisms. There is mucus, so within our oral cavity, within our mouth, within our nose, within our vaginal orifices, there are mucous membranes. Okay, so they are there to support or prevent infections from happening. And then there are cilia. They're small hair-like um, particles that protect our body even further. They're in our nose. They're there in our respiratory system. So, for instance, if we sneeze, we give out a lot of infectious agents that could get into our body. So there are cilia within our nostrils that are there to prevent the infection from coming into our body. Um, with cigarette smokers, cilia within the respiratory system, it's deranged, so it doesn't work as well as it should work. That is why they're more prone to develop infections. And then there's an adaptive immune system. So this is adapted, as I said, it needs activation. Okay, so B cells and T cells are there, but they need activation. Okay, so vaccination, it's introduced where we introduce a harmless version of the pathogen. So the pathogen or the bacteria or the virus itself is injected, but in a harmless version. It then triggers this adaptive immunity, producing antibodies, and then there are memory cells also that remember this pathogen, and they enable the body to have a quicker response to the pathogen that tries to cause or spread infection in the human body. So there are some cells that we have in our memory. In this immune system, we have our memory cells. They're not got anything to the brain with the brain, but they remember the pathogen once it came, and they remember how they had to defend against that pathogen. Then we want to evaluate the body's different non-specific defenses against infection. So there are different ways in which infectious organisms enter the body. Um, so we'll talk about how the different routes are. There are how is it transmitted. So there is person-to-person spread. Now this can be direct. So one person is, it's, let's say I am the person, I spread it directly to my partner, let's say. So it's through sexual activity, through sexually transmitted diseases, or obviously there's oral sex, there's vaginal sex, there's anal sex, there's different types of sex activities that can spread different types of infection. There's skin to skin. So if there's a person who has a skin infection, and um, again, a fungal infection is very contagious. So one person, if they have it, the other person can also develop it. Human bites, not very common. Mother to child. So this is called transmission that is vertical. So it is person to person, but it is vertical. So it's from the mother. So an infection in the mother can go to her unborn child while the child is in the womb. It's at that time that we're talking about. And then needle injection. So you're transmitting the infection from one person to another through needles, commonly used needles. So it's a route, it's a different route, but you're spreading your infection that you injected yourself. So that is why needle prick injuries are so dangerous. So that there's a person who can sorry, that one person can get pricked by that needle and develop the infection of another person. Then there's indirect, that is also person to person. So it's through contaminated objects. So there's a handle of the toilet door that's contaminated. You touch it, you later on don't wash your hands, or you don't wash your hands properly. You use the same hands, and then you develop an infection. Or they are droplets. So when a person sneezes, doesn't cover their mouth, that is when the droplets are there in the air and causes infection. Then there's a common vehicle spread. Sorry. So this refers to an infected substance that a number of people will use. So it's one way of spread that many people that infects many people. So either it's in through ingested um, material, so water, food. So you had some water that was contaminated. It could infect a number of people, not just you. So, and then food, or then fecal-oral. So it was spread from feces, and it was ingested orally. So in, let's say, in a daycare center, there's a nurse, there's a daycare provider. There's a woman who's or whoever it is who's working there. um, she doesn't she obviously she changes a child's diapers, and then she doesn't wash up properly. That then those infected hands can transmit to others. So several people can be can be infected because of that one incident. Then there are biological products where, for instance, if you've given blood transfusion and it's got hepatitis B or HIV, it's not been tested for that. Yeah, so blood transfusions and vaccines, for instance, they're a good example where, just a minute, I just need to have your attendance. That is why I went silent for a while. Just a minute. Mm. So if you don't understand it, any point, I'm not, sorry, asking you all for speaking up, but if you don't understand any point, please let me know. I'm happy to elaborate on that. Okay, so I'll just take your attendance. Yeah, that's done. Just save it. Okay, yeah, that's done. Okay, so I'll share again. So yeah, we were talking about yeah, common vehicle spread. So there are different ways. So I hope my screen is visible again. So so it's ingested water. We've talked ingested water, food, or fecal-oral, or biological products such as blood transfusion or vaccines. They're there also to transmit infections in different ways. So so there's a vaccine that was that wasn't proper, and then that could lead to um, some infectious agent to be spread to different people. So this is also one way where there's a common vehicle that is spreading the infection. Then there's vector-borne. We've talked about this already. There's spiders, ticks, fleas. They can transmit infection through their bites. And then there are animal bites such as rabies, pasturella, dog bites also. So rabies can be spread. One by a dog can bite several humans and cause the infection. So then the human infection, there's the defense system. We've talked about it earlier, but there are two parts of it, the immune system and the non-specific barrier system. So what is these? The non-specific barrier system within the humans. What is it? It's employed by the human body to prevent the disease. So we have different ways that it protects us. So we have the skin. So it's continuous. It doesn't have any breaks in it. There's a barrier that will not allow infections to be transmitted. So if that barrier breaks, obviously infections can transmit. The mucous membrane, so there's lines, this lines the entry points of the body. So that you have the inside. This traps microorganisms in the air. So there's so many microorganisms that can enter our nose, but it is this immune system that is there already, the mucous membrane, that allows for a barrier. Then there's the stomach acid. So whatever organisms are gaining entry and reach your stomach area, there's a low pH acidic environment. So the stomach is very acidic. So a lot of bacteria and viruses are degenerated. They lose their power in that acidic environment. You have your vaginal secretions that are also acidic, and they're toxic to pathogens. So if there's a pathogen that enters through another route, through the vaginal vagina, they have secretions within the vagina which are normal, natural, and those neutralize these infections. Your urine provides an acidic environment to toxic agents. Your hair and cilia, as I said, your nasal hair and cilia within your respiratory tracts, they trap harmful pathogens. And this deranges in cigarette smokers, unfortunately. Your tears, your sweat, your saliva, it has antibacterial properties as well. So there's a whole list of this. This describes that you have a whole list of um, body parts that are there to prevent your body against infections, and they are a natural barrier. Major components of the immune system, what is their role? So when a pathogen or an infectious agent passes the this non-specific barrier system, which we've talked about what it comprises of, the different host defense mechanisms that will play a role in further degenerating the or degrading that disease causing organism. This is known as the immune system. It can be divided into specific and non-specific immune responses. So the specific immune response, it's initiated by the white blood cells, which are also known as leukocytes. We call them leukocytes. Leuko is white, the blood cells. Okay. So wherever we have infection, there'll be a large number of white blood cells. This is how you can tell that if there's a lab test that you do on a person who's not well, and if they have a large number of white blood cells in their body, that shows that they have a bacterial infection. Okay. So, and this is this is normal. Okay. So if there's a foreign material, you'll have your granulocytes. These are different types of white blood cells. So you have your granulocytes that have a lot of granules. They're 60 to 70%. So the larger chunk is of granulocytes, which are the type of white blood cells. So they're neutrophils. These engulf and destroy bacteria. They're eosinophils that kill parasitic worms. So they're not for bacteria, they are for worms. Basophils prevent inflammation or infection from happening. Now, these granulocytes, they have granules within them. That is why their name is such. Then there are agranulocytes, which are lesser in number. They have no granules when you see them under the microscope. They're lymphocytes. They're involved in immune response, B and T cells, and monocytes. So they engulf and destroy pathogens, and they can present these pathogens to the specific immune system. So there are two types of white blood cells, granulocytes and agranulocytes. Okay. Then we have platelets. Don't have platelets, you could have a bleeding disorder where even they try and repair blood vessels that are disrupted. Platelets may be responsible for formation of blood clots at the site of injury. So therefore, if there's someone who has to have a surgery done, you need to know if they're on antiplatelet therapy, so on like blood thinners, they're called blood thinners. So if their blood goes very thick, so in older ages we have a blood going very thick, so we give them smoothing, we give them agents or drugs that thin their blood or make it more fluid and less clumping, so that those clumps are known as thrombosis, those clumping of platelets. So thrombosis are thrombus, or these clumps of platelets, they help in the clotting of blood. But if there's too much of clotting, obviously clots can create heart attacks, they can cause different types of cerebral injuries such as a stroke. So you need to know how much platelets are there. They should be in the normal range. So these are then there's a third line of immune defense. So this allows the body to mount a defense against the specific pathogen, to remember that the pathogen just in case it encounters it again. This is memory cells. Okay, so the immune response will be much faster and more efficient next time the pathogen is encountered. So when a foreign substance or pathogen enters the body, it is called an antigen. An antigen is a foreign substance which initiates an immune response in the host. This antigen will be recognized as a foreign part of the body. It's not a part of the body, which will then create a response, and then there will be antibodies that will be. Can you please go a bit slow? Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So it happens that when there's a foreign body that enters our body. So let's say there's a bacteria. Now the cells, they are there. In this specific immune response, this is another type of immune response that remembers the previous infection when it happened. Okay, so there's some infections against whom they're already there's the natural barrier that we talked about. Okay, we talked about these natural barriers. These are non-specificism, but then there are specific barriers such as the leukocytes. So these are specifically there for invading these organisms. Okay, and they are white blood cells that work together to invade the bacteria. And then there are platelets that are there to prevent from blood being like blood flow, and they give the normal consistency of the blood. And yeah, so then there's a specific immune response. This is specific against a targeted infection. Okay, so the antibody, there will be an immune response, there'll be a cascade of events. So once that organism invades your body, uh, you might have a reaction because of that. That is again because of the immune response. But then these immune responses are in the they're memorized by the body. And then when the second time you have the same infection, you might not have it as bad as the previous time because your body already remembers this infection. Okay, so this is known as humoral immunity. So when it is non-antibody mediated, it is called cell mediated immunity. Okay, this is a bit dense. I will make it clearer for you in the subsequent slides. Now we'll talk about vaccines. So this is artificial acquired immunity. Okay, this is not natural immunity. We've talked about what natural immunity we have. Okay, so you might know that now it is the flu vaccine that is being promoted a lot, or COVID-19 vaccine has always been promoted for two types of vaccines. Now, what these vaccines do, they have the organism that is injected into the body. Okay, so this organism, then the way it is injected, it's not the same organism. So, for instance, there's a mumps virus, okay, or a measles virus. Now, what you do in the lab, you make it is alive. That vaccine is alive, but you make it pass through certain processes that kills its ability to kill the human being. So it's not harmful. It is alive, but it is not harmful. but its material can be there to provoke or to excite an immune response. Okay. And then there's inactivated. So this is not live. These are types of inactivated vaccines. These are polio virus and influenza virus. Okay, so you have two types of vaccines. There's live attenuated, there's inactivated. These are the most common types of vaccines, but we have other vaccines also. Now talking about humoral immunity. So this is known as antibody. So antibodies, we said to you, they involve B cells. These B cells recognize antigens or the enemy cells, okay, blood or our lymphatics, okay. So part of the B cells, they form memory cells, okay. So in whenever, again, as I said, in the future, if you have another infection, uh, that infection will be killed um, in a better way through these memory cells. Okay, this is known as natural or acquired immunity. So it is not artificial immunity. Okay, cell mediated. So that is cell mediated humoral immunity. Okay, so it is antibody mediated, which has B cells. Then you have cell mediated immunity. This will not have antibodies. So this process involves T cells. So they recognize which and they recognize antigens, or they recognize, for instance, if you had a transplant, or there's a tumor or a virus. So these T cells are activated. This is cell mediated. They don't produce antibodies. Uh, they have cells, specific cells, such as helper cells. So these stimulate, what these helper cells do, they stimulate the B cells, these humoral immunity cells, and those produce antibodies. So these T cells do not produce antibodies themselves. They stimulate the B cells that are there for antibody production. Okay, cell mediated immunity will be the first reaction for cancers and viruses. Okay, so if there's a cancer or a virus, these T cells will be activated. They'll produce helper T cells, which will then stimulate B cells. So this is a whole chart. I'm not going into details of this, but uh, this is quite a dense chart. But all the slides, not today, but maybe tomorrow or next week, I'll then go through this whole this slide. So each response, it provides a series of events. Okay, so you have different types of cells. So just for now, remember that there are macrophages, there are T lymphocytes, and there are B lymphocytes. Okay, and then you have plasma cells, which produce antibodies, and memory B cells. So there's these cells, that the B cells or the T cells, they might not be in their activated form. So they once they are triggered, they then change into their activated form, and they turn into macrophages, into T lymphocytes, or into B lymphocytes. I'm not going into detail. I will go into detail once I think. So the easiest way to understand specific immunity is to follow the path of a non-specific antigen into the body. So let's say there's an antigen, such as a virus, that enters the body, multiplies there, and is carried around on the blood and the lymph. There's the B cells do, they activate macrophages. We've talked about macrophages, okay, over here, that are there again to kill the cells. And these then present it to T cells. Okay, and the T cells then divide and further. So what you have to remember is that there's a virus that enters the body, there are B cells, along with the T cells, which are then activated. They then suppress the infection. So there's this diagram that you can see. There's helper T cell activation and action. So that there's an antigen the killer, the organism that enters. Okay, this antigen is recognized. This antigen is recognized by the cell. They're helper T cells. Okay, some of these helper T cells produce memory cells, while others will activate B cells. They'll act off neutrophils and macrophages. Okay, so these are activated cells. All of these cells, so you have the humoral immunity because of B cells that produce antibodies. You have the cellular immunity because of T cells, and you have non-specific defense mechanisms where you have macrophages and neutrophils that all of them align together to kill the cell. So, yeah, so I just have 2 or 3 more slides. I'm not going to go into too much of detail because I'll stop right here. So each type of T cell has a specific role. So there's a T cell that destroys, as its name suggests. There's a helper T cell that will help in activating cells. There'll be memory cells that remember the antigen, and then there's a suppressor cell that ends the immune response if the infection is destroyed. So T cells and B cells, they work together. Okay, so T cells are cell mediated and B cells are antibody mediated. I will stop right here because I know the session is getting a bit dense. I will repeat these slides tomorrow again, and we will go through just 2 or 3 more slides because it's gone a bit too dense, I know. Just for this recording, obviously you'll get it on Monday, but whatever I've talked about it, I hope you've listened to it carefully. I will repeat it tomorrow and we will go further on from there. So I'm stopping here because I know, and I'll elaborate it even more tomorrow. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I know it's a bit more.